So, Carolann, I just finally get to meet you.
Yeah.
Um, so, I'd like to ask you first um, about your song Matches. Uh,
Ah.
it's your most viewed song on your YouTube channel,
hmm
and I want to know what inspired it and if you think we're inching toward uh, the image that you painted in the song,
hmm
or,
Yeah.
or if we're actually inching away from it.
Oh, I wish we were inching away from it. Thank you, first of all, for looking that up and for listening to that song. Matches took me a very, very long time to write. The subject matter, of course, is gun violence in America, and it is frustrating to say the least. And it's a big, 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 big topic. And I started writing it right after the Newtown tragedy, wherein all those little kids and their teachers were murdered. And I really, like a lot of Americans, probably thought that that was going to be the end of it. That's the end. It's like that. That is that. We can't take anymore. That's it. Once people start murdering small children with high-powered weapons, surely our authorities will do something, and we'll get our assault weapons ban back, and and greater legislation would start to happen. But I didn't. And as the months went by, and I tried to write about it, I tried to write about it in so many different ways, and it just wasn't clicking. And then more and more things started happening, and then Charleston happened. That was the tipping point. When Charleston happened, I was like, okay, this song has to be out there in whatever form it is at this time, and that was finished up right after the Charleston massacre. And I hate that we have names for these things. With some help from a good friend, I ran by a good friend who's a personal song coach for me, and we worked through some things that kind of that I thought needed polishing. But the core of the song is the another, because that seems to be the way things go. We get this drumbeat of tragedies, not just in mass shootings, but in our own communities here in Brooklyn and in large cities, and there's gun violence everywhere. Gun violence where it shouldn't be. Anybody can get a gun. It's easier to get a gun than to get a driver's license, and that is wrong. So no, unfortunately I don't see this issue waning, and I unfortunately feel like I kind of wanted this song to become irrelevant before now. It's been a while. It's been out there for quite some time, and and every time I post it, I even grew tired of posting it because there were so many, one after another. If I posted, if I posted it every time there was an incident, I'd just be posting nothing but that song because it's everywhere. So I do intend to perform it at People's Voice. My performing partner that night, Bev Grant, as a matter of fact, has encouraged me to play it at every show. Uh,
Mhm.
so I know People's Voice would be a welcome place for that song, because I think we have kindred folk at People's Voice who see the problem and want to find a solution.
No, definitely. I definitely think so.
Mhm.
That song would match very well, not only with People's Voice, but also with the times. I feel like personally, um, it's something that is always on a lot of people's minds, especially unfortunately, since these are unfortunately increasing in frequency. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
coming closer to large population centers, which is a
yeah, yeah.
unfortunate trend.
Yeah, I mean, and for a while, we could be in denial and say, "Oh, this only happens it will never happen in the city of New York. It'll never happen in a big city." So that's in places with lax gun laws. New York State, New York City has a lot of restrictive gun laws, and then Buffalo,
Hmm.
so that's a little close to home. Even though Buffalo's 8 hours away, it's our home state, and they
Hmm.
share the same gun laws that we do, and it happened anyway. So yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking about that. That's, the most difficult song I've ever written, and probably the most difficult to talk about, I guess, which is why I had to put it into a song. I find it hard to write in general about big social issues, and that one in particular was rough.
No, I gravitated toward that song because it's a
Mm-hmm.
song that a lot of people, even though it is a increasing problem in the United States, have not brought a kind of um, focus, singular focus to it.
Yeah,
Um,
and there are a lot of songs about it. And I mean, if we
mhm.
really believe in ourselves as songwriters, we got to write about the hard stuff. There are a lot of really good songs that I've heard about it. There was one from quite some time ago that Cheryl Wheeler wrote, and it was basically just a rant of maybe it's the this, maybe it's the that, maybe it's the politics, maybe it's the video games, and over and over and over again, like a drum beat. And then the last line of the song is just, if it were up to me, I'd take away the guns. Boom. It's like mic drop, walk out. No one can ever beat that song as far as I'm concerned. But it raised the issue a very long time ago. And, sadly, we have to still keep raising it.
um, so we did touch a little bit on like I guess uh, your connections to a little bit of your thoughts about like rural life, I guess, and how it compares to urban issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what uh, how do you think your connection to Appalachia? I know we referenced Buffalo, and
Yeah.
Buffalo is not necessarily a rural place,
No,
but
no, not at all. It's a big city.
yeah, compared to New York, I guess a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
states can be.
Yeah.
How does that influence Appalachian influence impact how you not only write your music and perform, but also how you see social issues more generally?
Wow. That's an excellent, excellent question. Excellent question. I was born and raised here in New York City and lived in Appalachia in Eastern Tennessee, doing a theater project for several years. I got there and I was a fish out of water. I used to get pulled over all the time. At the time, I had uh, I drove a big brown Cadillac, 1977 Coupe de Ville that I bought from my father. And so this is big stretchy car with, New York plates, and I'd get pulled over all the time. And the police were usually surprised to find a woman driving the car. And they were even more surprised when I handed them my license and it said Bronx, New York.
Mhm.
So, I was treated with some suspicion when I first arrived in that part of the country. And I felt odd. I felt like a fish out of water. But after a while, you get to know people on an individual basis and you start talking to people. And, I still have, this was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago that I was there. And I still have, personal connections in the area. I still have friends that I go and stay with and visit when I'm there. And there is more that connects us than divides us. I think that's what my first impression of living in a rural place was. And just on a personal level, yeah, so much. I felt so different and so, so strange. But at the same time, we found a lot to have in common with people who were raised in a very different way than I was, and people whose experience was very different than mine, and sometimes whose values were very different than mine. Some of them saw me as a heathen. I mean, at the time, I was a practicing Catholic, and that, believe it or not, is, heathen
Mhm.
to a lot of folks there. And on a musical level, I mean, that's why I talk about it on I think you probably looked at my website and saw that I talk about it, because aside from the personal connections, it changed the way I looked at music. I had never really heard um, that old time country music in that way. The music that was brought over by Scots Irish people and from Scotland and Ireland in like the 1700s, and it filtered through the experience of people living in the mountains, and the simplicity of those lyrics and the simplicity of those melodies. that spoke about hardship. There was a lot of, these folks didn't live an easy life. They came over here and they're farming in the mountains, and it's not an easy place to live. It's not an easy place to get around. It's not an easy place to farm. It's where your stereotypical moonshiner comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly people made moonshine because they couldn't get their crops out of the mountains to the market in a conventional way. So it was a whole lot easier to reduce it to moonshine, get a whole lot more money for it, and a whole lot less transport space. But the way that musical language spoke about hardship, and the way that musical language kind of harkened back to another time. There's a lot of minor chords and modal influences in those songs that are somehow, in their simplicity, musically sophisticated. And I like that vocabulary for expressing things that I needed to express, as weirdly. And when I moved back to New York City, I wasn't writing about rural things. I was writing about things that were happening here in my life here in New York. And I'm like, I still use that musical vocabulary to express, to team up with lyrical ideas that are more urban, I suppose, in nature. And that's still my touchstone. I don't really necessarily write strictly that way anymore, but it turned my world upside down musically, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. I think it's a very unique kind of blend that you bring to like urban issues, being sung through a kind of folkish, country-esque kind of format.
A little weird. I'm a Brooklyn girl in cowboy boots. It's very strange.
Right. It is very much Brooklyn Girl in cowboy boots, but it's a genre and style that is it's seeing a lot more prominence. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a lot older than a lot of the folks making that kind of music right now, so it's like,
right.
I'm not sure if I'm jumping on their bandwagon or they're jumping on mine. I don't know. It's probably been around for a while, but yeah. And certainly, there's a lot of people from a lot of places here in New York. So we've got every kind of music under the sun, which I love. It's another reason I love being a New Yorker, is we get to hear music from everywhere.
Speaking of New York and Appalachia, I'd like to ask you to compare your thoughts of like the New York of old and the Appalachia of old compared to how you've interact or see 2023's New York and Appalachia. Like how has it changed since you started your music career?
Wow. Well, New York. I started my music career in New York City around the turn of the century, I guess you could say. I had been doing, before that, I was an actor, and I had been doing a lot of theater, which is what brought me to Tennessee and Kansas and Florida and and all over the country on tours and things like that. And when I came back to New York, in the early 2000s, when I was kind of leaving theater and starting to write my own music, there was a scene. There were a lot of places where independent musicians could get heard. There were a lot of places where you could get a gig, where you could walk into a random bar that has music, you hand them a tape, they listen to the tape, you call them the next week and they have a gig. Yeah, sure. And you come and you play and you build a following in person. And this is going to sound so quaint. We used to, you would get people on your mailing list, but back in the day, in the early days, it wasn't mailing list, even email. It was mailing list like, you send me your address and I send you a postcard. So that happened a lot. I was, sending little postcards once a week or so to my mailing list to tell them where I was going to be playing next. It was crazy. It was, if you get a big enough mailing list, it started to cost a lot of money. But then again, postcards were cheaper to send. But anyway, I feel like it's gotten harder for not even just, people of my age, but like for young musicians. It's like, how, where are the scenes? The scene is fractured. It's like there's, where do you play anymore? You can't even, it's hard to get a gig in New York because there are fewer places to play, and there are this, and the places that do exist are this greater competition for, and the clubs are not always giving the artists a fair deal. I mean, that's always been the case. So yeah, I think it's harder for young musicians, and they have to spend a lot of their time, and me, spend a lot of time promoting, being your own promoter, and making a brand for yourself, which wasn't the case in those days. You played music, and if and you could and get heard. Yeah, a lot has changed, and I don't know the answer to that really. I guess it's harder. And yeah, the place where I lived in Appalachia has changed. I have been back a bunch of times in recent years. It's probably become harder there too, economically speaking. There are fewer jobs, and there's tourists, but then of course the tourists went away for a while because of the pandemic. So people are, economic hard times are something that, that kind of people can share for sure, in a different way. Our rent and our rent is going up like crazy. It's like, how do normal people live in New York City anymore? And down in Tennessee where I lived, I'm sure that's similar. Probably people are having a hard time just even, putting gas in a car in that part of the world. They're not renting so much as we are, maybe, or maybe it won't be going up quite as exponentially as rent here, but still. Mm-hmm. Economic hard times, and maybe that's where good songs come from. Sometimes people say, right?
Mm-hmm. That's certainly where
hard times,
Absolutely, it's certainly where a lot of I believe the golden era of a lot of country music comes from.
Yeah. Right. That was a very, very broad question, and I started to ramble a little bit. I'm like, wow, I could talk about this all day or not at all. So, and as I examine it in my mind, it's like, oh, there's more. There's a lot more to that. There's digging down,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's me personally, having like lived in the city forever. I really like to learn about and see a lot of value in learning about the experiences of people, in rural America, whether it's West Virginia or Texas, Montana, mm-hmm. what have you. Their experiences are just something that New Yorkers do honestly take for granted a lot of the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a monolith by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we joke and say, oh, there's New York and the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of true. Yeah. I travel a lot. I've been a lot of places. I've been, and I do find that the places that I feel, I mean, there's, most at home are other large urban areas. Like, oh, I went to Chicago and I felt like I fit right in. Oh, I went to, San Francisco and I kind of felt like I fit right in, places like that. Large metropolises I do okay in. I feel a little fish out of water in any other place. But again, if you talk to people, if you actually talk to people about real stuff, there's a lot more in common, I think. Yeah.
I think that's a really good, important point. There is a lot more in common than what mm-hmm. drives us apart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How have your relationships between the arts and activism impacted the way you experience both?
That is an excellent question. Also, I'm a baby activist. I will call myself a baby activist. I became politically engaged later in adulthood. As a young adult, I'm not sure I felt I needed to be politically engaged. I felt I was privileged enough not to have to care about a lot of things, to trust the system and to trust that people in authority were doing the right thing. I always made sure I voted. That was a thing I always did, and I, oddly, even before I became politically awakened, I was voting for candidates on the left, which I was like, oh, wow, that was good for me. Even when I really didn't know too much, I was still, voting to the left of the dial. But to become engaged in politics, I started showing up at at protest events. In later adulthood, I would say the first large protest I ever went to was against the United States invasion of Iraq, the first one, the right after 9/11. I think that would be a political turning point for me. And I started becoming more aware and more engaged in politics after that, because the stakes felt so much higher. I think I needed something like 9/11 to bring it home to me and say, okay, now your leaders are going to do something really irresponsible. Speak up. So then the speaking up started, and I still, I'm learning how to do it, learning how to, to be engaged, who to stay in contact with, where to show up, when to show up, who to show up for. And learning how to write about it is another giant step that I'm just learning to take. There's a lot of songs that live in my closet, that I've written about various issues that move me, that I haven't been able to bring out into the world, because I doubt my own voice, especially, and I'd say that the heat got turned up even more in the summer of 2020 after George Floyd was killed. Then, a bunch of songs came, and I was in the streets, and a lot of anger, and I became even more distrustful of authority figures that I had been taught to trust in my lifetime. So I think these two things are going hand in hand for me. I admire activist writers like my friend Bev Grant. I think this is why I've been following her around so much in the past few years. I mean, other than the fact that she's an excellent friend and we make good music together and we have a good time together, but I see Bev and people like her as having married those two things, having married the activism and the writing and the music for a good. And I'm still learning how to do that. And I appreciate that People's Voice has asked me to come and play so I can do that in front of people, experiment.
Absolutely. And it's I think what you said about, especially Bev Grant, who marries the two very well, artistry and activism. It's definitely a very, difficult and harrowing thing, but it's something that is absolutely necessary. So I'd like to thank you for, your work. And my last question. It seems like I'm running.
Well, we're running out of time, so we'll make it quick.
Yep. Okay. So my last question for you, Carolann, is how has your background in theater impacted your approach to music?
Mm-hmm. Oh wow, it's everything. It's just everything. Theater is about forming connection. Theater is about telling stories. Theater is about getting emotion across to people, and that, above all, is my job, I think. And it took me a while to realize that. I could labor over my lyrics and labor over my music, but if I'm not connecting with people on stage, then what's it for? That's the most important thing. Whatever I'm saying in my songs, whatever words I choose, however I choose to sing them, it's most important to have that connection. And theater taught me to do that. There are techniques, to be comfortable on stage and to be to occupy your space and to convey emotion and to live inside of the song while you're performing the song. More than anything, if I'm the singer of the song, if I'm an accompanist on the song, if I'm just the bass player, if I'm just oohing and on in the background, whatever it is, I have to be connected emotionally to the material in some way in order to be an emotional conduit for the people who are listening. And that, my friend, is theatrical. That's
the secret sauce.
Secret sauce.
Awesome.
a minute to explain and a lifetime to master. I'm still working on it, but yes, that's my goal in every show is to connect. Even if you're just connecting with one person every time you sing a song, you've done your job.
That's I think that's a very that's great wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom there that it like uh, only that it all of the work doesn't necessarily need to connect en masse for it to be successful. I think it's a piece of wisdom that a lot of younger performers in my generation uh, could definitely benefit from. Really learning.
That's what you need. You don't need 10,000 likes or a million
Mhm.
followers. Maybe you do. It would be nice to have, but
Absolutely, yeah.
sure.
We live in a society
Yeah,
where it's valued, but
we do. I recognize the importance of it, and I recognize, the uh, yeah. You want to get if you something is worth singing about, you want as many people to hear it as possible.
mhm.
But it's not going to like touch everybody, like in that spot. When you like, I know when I listen to music, there are songs that I connect with. And I can't even explain why sometimes. I can't even say, oh, this is a great song. Well, why is it a great song? I don't know, but it hit me right here and it lives inside me and it is part of my life. And if I talk to the songwriter about why they wrote the song, sometimes I'm disappointed as to like, oh, that's not what you intended. But it doesn't matter what they intended. Like it doesn't matter almost what I intend because it's how it lands and how the listener processes that through the lens of their own experience that matters.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so emotional conduit and letting the audience, letting the listener find a safe place to process emotion.
Wow. Um, well, I unfortunately I have to wrap this up.
Yes, yes.